ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming. I think it is a very important evening tonight because here it is. This is what I call the smoking gun. In this documentation, it becomes quite clear, and Naomi will then, of course, elaborate on that. Pfizer lied, and so did our governments. And how did it all start? It started pretty much out by something called the Freedom of Information Act, and requiring Pfizer, respectively the FDA, the Federal Drug Association, or Food and Drug Administration of the United States, to release these Pfizer papers. And Pfizer, respectively FDA, then not wanting to do that, petitioned a court. And they wanted the judge to allow the FDA to keep the papers under wraps for 75 years. Interestingly enough, though, there have been talk in Germany this April, the so-called Freedom of Information Act, so any citizen can ask the government for information. And there was a discussion about abolishing that right for the citizens altogether. Now, that's a big tell. So they no longer want the citizens to even know what the government should be publishing. But that is just a side note. So anyhow, the FDA wanted the Pfizer papers to be locked up for 75 years, which the judge didn't go with. Then the FDA offered, well, then, we would be prepared to publish 500 pages per month, which in essence would have taken 75 years to get all of the paper out, because it was in total roughly 450,000 pages. Well, the judge didn't want to have any of that, and he ordered the FDA, they would have to release 55,000 pages per month. And that was over a period of, I think, like 1 year or 1.5 years, and then it was all there. And then our very honorable guest tonight, Dr. Naomi Wolf, your concern was that it would just be lost in history, as you said earlier, because there is no way that layman can sift through 450,000 pages of highly technical information. So what Naomi managed to do was to gather, how many? 2,000, 3,000? 3,500 volunteers globally sifting through that information and putting all of the information together for everyone to see and everyone to read. Like I said, it is the smoking gun. We have the information. And I just remember today, and I actually looked it up, it was on July 25th of 2022. I made a public comment in an event like this, and I will read to you what I said 3 years ago. This mRNA campaign will go down in history as the biggest medical scandal ever. And moreover, it will go down as the biggest crime committed against humanity. Back then, anyone could have known if he wanted to know. All you had to do was go through the adverse event reports in the United States, and you would have found out that within the first 7 months of the rollout of the mRNA injection, there were 20 times more serious adverse effects, and there were 23 times more deaths reported than of all of the other vaccines combined ever since they have been rolled out in the 70s. I repeat, 7 months of mRNA injections, 20 times more serious side effects, and 23 times more deaths reported than all of the other vaccines combined in a period of 30 years. This is the lie that people have been literally pushed down their throats. They have been threatened. They have been ostracized. They have been criminalized. I mean, you name it. That went on. So it was particularly interesting that I made this comment 3 years ago, and I read it in your book. In the very first pages, Naomi, you said the very same thing. And yeah, I stand by that comment, and I will be repeating it for times to come. So anyway, but you didn't come here to listen to my boring remarks here. I'm pretty much sure you came all to see and hear and listen to Dr. Naomi Campbell.
Thank you.
Can you imagine? Great, isn't it great? Dr. Naomi Wolf, of course. And I really have to thank you. You put in a lot of work. I mean, just flipping through the pages, it is so much information. But to compile it and put it together for laymen to understand and read, to really understand the massive lie that we have been subjected to. And I would very much like you to join me in welcoming the great Naomi Wolf. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Can you hear me loud and clear if I sit this distance? Wonderful. Well, thank you, MEP Anderson. Thank you to your so hospitable staff who has welcomed me and my husband, Brian O'Shea, to Brussels. And thank you all for taking time from your incredibly important work to sit with us here. Thank you to those watching online. I just want to say before I begin that it's extremely moving to me to be sitting in this place in the heart of Europe and meeting so many people from different political perspectives, really different in many ways. I consider myself a liberal. I've been a Democrat. I advised the Clinton team and Vice President Gore in his election campaign, but that really doesn't matter. You know, Ms. Anderson, MEP Anderson, or with other MEPs whom I've met here, their colleagues from whatever political party, because what's happening right now in Europe and the United States and worldwide is an extraordinary historical moment. It's related to what I'm going to tell you, but all over the world, people are realizing that what divides us in policy terms or political labels is not nearly as important as our fundamental core values as Europeans, as North Americans, people around the world who love freedom and individual human rights, the rule of law, and that's what was targeted ultimately by these injections as it's being targeted in other ways. And I will explain that, but fundamentally, whatever the political party is of people I'm meeting here, we are brothers and sisters, we are allies, because first of all, we need to save European democracy, we're saving American democracy, we need to save democracies, rule of law, and free speech around the world. So I just want to say that before we begin. Shall I launch right in? All right, so some of you may know who I am. I've been a public figure since I was 26 years old, and others may not. I'm a long-standing best-selling feminist author. I've written 9 best-selling books, translated in European languages of many kinds, and I was a Rhodes Scholar. I got a DPhil at Oxford University in English literature. I'm not a medical doctor, but I am a journalist. I've appeared in every major news site. I was a columnist for the Guardian and for the Sunday Times of London and so on. But all of that didn't matter in June of 2021 when which covered women's reproductive health, when I noted that we're reporting eyewitness accounts of their bodies, which is, as a feminist, you're supposed to be allowed to listen to women about their bodies. They were reporting eyewitness accounts of menstrual damage upon having received the mRNA injection. And literally, that was my post. And overnight, I was canceled from X, Twitter at that time, canceled from Facebook, YouTube. My bio changed around the world simultaneously, which is interesting. I didn't think AI had rolled out then, but something did that. Went from Rhodes Scholar, doctorate at Oxford, to conspiracy theorist. And overnight, every major news outlet that had published me and featured me for 40 years closed their doors to me, and I was literally voiceless. So that doesn't really matter what happened to me personally, except that a warning signal that women around the world were entitled to have received about their own bodies and reproductive health was intentionally silenced. And I found out later, during lawsuits brought by the state's attorneys general of the state of Missouri and of Louisiana, that it was people for whom I had voted, the Biden administration, notably senior people at the CDC, the Census Bureau, which knows where I live, I'm related to, other agencies, including law enforcement agencies, that had colluded to put pressure on Twitter and Facebook and other social media sites to silence my tweet and to discredit me. And that was very terrifying to find out the most powerful government in the world had singled you out. And by the way, we have a First Amendment in the United States, thank God. And 2 courts now have found that or 2 settlements have found that my constitutional First Amendment rights were violated, and that the Biden administration had no legal right to silence a citizen, but that happened. So as a journalist, I realized that there must be a story here, because why go to so much trouble to suppress this simple tweet of mine? And in 2022, as you described, the successful lawsuit by attorney Aaron Siri led to the forced release of 450,000 documents from Pfizer in the custody of our FDA. Now, I was only being hosted at that time by Steve Bannon, the far right-wing commentator. Another example of, I don't agree with Bannon on a lot of issues. I'm still a liberal, but he cared about what was happening to women and children. So I was talking on his show about these issues, and he said, these documents will be lost to history. Of course, you're going to convene a group of experts to go through them. And I said on the air, of course I am, not having any experience in doing that. But miraculously, 3,500 doctors and scientists did convene and worked for 2.5 years pro bono in service of humanity, but also out of love for science and medicine, to read through these massive documents, technical documents, and to issue what are now 105 reports. 50 of them are in that book, if you would kindly hold it up at some point. And we published them in real time. Now, before I tell you what's in the Pfizer documents, I just want to note that it's been 2.5 years since we began publishing these reports, and we have not received a lawyer's letter from Pfizer. So what is reported is accurate. No one from Pfizer is telling us to cease and desist. It's accurate. And also, it's not my opinion. I just want to stress that. I'm not the author of this book. I'm an editor of it. Amy Kelly is the leader of the effort, my COO. But what's in this book are reports that link directly to the primary documents. So if you have any doubt about any conclusion in any of these reports, you can link, you can check the Pfizer documents and see for yourself what that primary document looks like. All right, so what's in the Pfizer documents? First of all, and I think this is very important for you as MEPs, Pfizer knew a month into the rollout into the public of this injection, so November of 2020, that this vaccine did not work to stop COVID. And I want you to process that and absorb that. It means that everything that followed, the mandates, the lost jobs, the businesses that had to close, the children not allowed to go back to school or university if they didn't take the shot, right? The armed forces compelled to take the shot, the pilots compelled. All of that that followed, the two-tier society, the suppression of liberties, was predicated on a lie. It didn't stop COVID, concluded Pfizer. The efficacy and vaccine failure. And the most common side effect of getting vaccinated is COVID. So everything that followed was a lie. Second, they knew that the injection did not stay in your deltoid. I'm sure that Europeans, probably through the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, like our FDA, or other public health entities, told people here, if you have side effects, it's likely to be chills, fever, a little fatigue. You may need to lie down. No, Pfizer knew that and they said that the materials stay in the injection site. They knew that was a lie. In fact, in the Pfizer documents, there are charts showing that the materials, the spike protein, the mRNA, the lipid nanoparticles, which is a petroleum byproduct, rather polyethylene glycol, a petroleum byproduct surrounding lipid nanoparticles, an industrial fat. They didn't stay in the deltoid. They biodistribute within 48 hours, and they leave the injection site and biodistribute to major organs throughout the body. They cross the blood-brain barrier. You may have noticed personality changes in some of your loved ones who took this injection, but they also accumulate in the liver, the adrenals, the spleen, the lymphatic system, and if you're a woman, they accumulate in your ovaries. And so this is an industrial fat accumulating in women's ovaries, right? So the first injection accumulates in your ovaries. The second injection, more accumulates in your ovaries. Our experts could not find any mechanism whereby this material left the body, male or female. So by the first booster, people are already reporting when they do surgery on vaccinated women that they're fully blocked ovaries, okay, as well as other kinds of damage. Pfizer knew that. Pfizer knew that they had to hire 2,400 full-time staff in order to process the reports of serious adverse events they were already starting to receive. And indeed, within the Pfizer documents, it's a 3-year period of time, end of 2020, November of 2020 to February of 2021. Well, that tallied up over 42,000 serious adverse events. Many individuals had multiple serious adverse events, and just an overwhelming number of side effects that were not fever and chills, but in fact, things you were not told about. So the number one side effect in the Pfizer documents is something called myalgia, which is muscle pain. How many people do you know who just feel bad? Well, Pfizer knew they would feel bad. Doctors are baffled, myalgia. The second most common side effect is joint pain because these injections are inflammatory. And Pfizer knew that. What is arthritis? What is joint pain? Tendon pain, it's inflammatory. How many people do you know who are limping or had to have knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder replacements? Young, healthy people, many of them. Pfizer knew. The third most common side effect, as I mentioned, is COVID. But after that, there is a catastrophic industrial scale tallying of horrifically serious side effects, notably heart damage, myocarditis, pericarditis, problems with aortas, a great deal of blood damage, thrombotic thrombocytopenia, blood clots, lung clots, leg clots. These lipid nanoparticles create clotting in the body. Everyone knew that about lipid nanoparticles before this mRNA who worked with them. Florid neurological events. Our experts found that the lipid nanoparticles strip the myelin sheath from nerves, which is how electricity is conducted in a nerve impulse. So, of course, you're getting tremors. How many people do you know who now have tremors? You're getting Guillain-Barré. You're getting dementias, epilepsy-type seizures, horrific neurological events, and also autoimmune disorders of all kinds, lupus-type disorders, because now we know these injections damage the immune system. Also, things that would surprise you, a huge amount of eye damage, blindness, eye damage of all kinds. And in addition to all of these side effects, miscarriages, I'll get into the reproductive damage, 1,200 deaths in 3 months. And these are not statistically random people who happen to have died. They were old, they had prior conditions. 1,200 deaths that doctors let Pfizer or the authorities know needed to be recorded because there was some causality they were concerned about. Other smoking guns, you call this the smoking gun. 2 of our reports show, in my view, causality. Half of the liver and the stroke serious adverse events took place 48 hours after the injection, including deaths. Pfizer knew this. Okay. Pfizer knew by April of 2021 that minors were being injured by this vaccine, specifically myocarditis and pericarditis, heart damage. Never before have we had healthy young people dropping dead on play. But what Pfizer knew was that 35 minors had sustained heart damage. Indeed, one of the most scandalous things that our work has surfaced is that the FDA knew, the CDC knew, Dr. Walensky knew by April of 2021. The Israeli Ministry of Health was trying to tell the CDC and the Biden administration that minors were having their hearts damaged. And instead of, we did a Freedom of Information Act request to for the Biden records at that time, mentioning myocarditis. And we found that there was active conversation, including to POTUS, right, surfacing all the way up potentially to the White House, 15 White House staffers, Dr. Walensky, Dr. Fauci, the head of HHS, all on these communications where they were talking about myocarditis in minors following the shot. But instead of saying, we have to pull this, we have to tell the parents of America, and by extension the world, that they must save their children and young adults from this risk, they were deciding how to spin a cover-up. And they issued a 17-page document that even after the FOIA is completely redacted, which was a script that they used to spend the next 3 months of summer telling parents to get their minors injected. And indeed, a big influencer TikTok campaign encouraging young adults and minors to get injected. And they knew the kids would sustain what is often deadly heart damage from these injections. They knew. And in fact, Senator Ron Johnson, now under this administration, is using our work to unredact those documents and to shine a light on that cover-up. He had hearings about it. Pfizer knew all of these things, but all these side effects, all this damage isn't the most shocking, surprising thing in the Pfizer documents. And I'll tell you what is. COVID is a respiratory infection. So you would expect a lot of information in Pfizer documents about lungs, about oxygen levels, about mucous membranes. No, there's almost nothing about respiratory issues in the Pfizer documents. What there is a 360-degree obsessive focus on ruining human reproduction. Sperm, ruining fallopian tubes, ruining ova, ruining placentas, ruining fetuses in utero, ruining the birth process, ruining lactation. That's what they were studying. That's what they were focused on. Why is that? Why did they take male and female rats, male vaccinated, female unvaccinated, mate them, sacrifice the rats, and examine the cells of their sex organs for a respiratory infection? Why is that? Overwhelmingly, the focus is on ruining human reproduction. So let me just give you some examples. They knew, as I mentioned, that it blocks the ovaries, which could contribute to the menstrual damage that I mentioned. But they also knew, as I mentioned, that the lipid nanoparticles, which are designed to cross every membrane in the body, what is a membrane? The placenta is a membrane. The lipid nanoparticles traverse the placenta of women who were told in my country to get this injection during their pregnancies, violating decades of knowledge about how to not hurt babies in utero, right? You don't give the pregnant woman anything. But women were told to inject this, traverses the placenta. It causes calcifications in the placenta, which prevent the baby from getting nutrients and oxygen. And in fact, in my country, midwives independently are reporting to me, leaking to me. As a journalist, when you have multiple independent reports, there's a story there that babies are being born early because the placentas cannot grow normally. And people are nodding. They're seeing the same thing, no doubt, in Europe, or there are reports of it. The placentas are flat. They send me pictures, not normal, supplied with blood and oxygen. And so babies have to be delivered early. So standard. Well, it's not that easy to deliver a baby from a mother whose placenta has been impaired. Placentas are falling apart in the delivery process. What does that mean? It means women are hemorrhaging during childbirth or retaining part of the placenta, which is so dangerous. And so maternal fetal mortality, women dying in childbirth in the West, which had largely solved this deadly problem of the past in other parts of the world, is up by 40% since the injections. Pfizer knew. Pfizer knew that the lipid nanoparticles would go into the baby. And again, what's a membrane? They knew that the lipid nanoparticles would traverse the membrane around the testes of baby boys in utero, thus degrading the Leydig cells and Sertoli cells of baby boys of vaccinated moms. Even if the babies are not vaccinated, they're getting this from their moms. So what does that do? Sertoli cells and Leydig cells are the factories of masculinity. Hormones, they switch on the hormones of masculinity at adolescence, triggering what we think of as a traditional adult male development, deep voices, broad shoulders, body hair, facial hair, and as an adult, the ability to father a child successfully. Well, we don't even know if these baby boys in utero at adolescence will grow into normal fertile adult males, even if they're never vaccinated with this mRNA injection. But Pfizer knew they were damaging the testes of baby boys in utero. They knew they were damaging sperm. An andrology report confirmed that the injection killed and motility of sperm in men. And to this day, and this is a job for you all, I believe, to this day, there's something Pfizer knows about dangers to women in vaccinated men's sperm that they're not disclosing. In the Pfizer documents, there's a warning to men who were subjects of the study not to have intercourse if they were vaccinated with unvaccinated women of childbearing age, and if they did, to use 2 reliable forms of contraception. 2, Pfizer defines exposure to the vaccine as including, right, shedding is supposed to be a conspiracy theory, as including skin contact, breath, and body fluids, such as semen. And to this day, we don't know what that is, right? We know that women anecdotally are having horrible cramps, real problems with when they have intercourse with vaccinated husbands. We don't know why Pfizer said don't do that. I can tell you one hypothetical a little further on. They told women in the study not to get pregnant. Nonetheless, 270 women got pregnant in the study, vaccinated women. Now, 234 of them, the records of what happened to that pregnancy were lost, which is illegal. Pfizer is supposed to follow them through pregnancy. However, of the 36 women who gave birth, over 80% of them lost their babies. Over 80%. Pfizer knew that. One of the most chilling things in the Pfizer papers is something called a pregnancy and lactation report. And I'm feeling like the heaviness in the room, and I empathize. You know, this is very dark news, but I also want to say there's a lot that can be done, and you all are in a beautiful position to do it. So please bear with me for the rest of this darkness, because, you know, this is very serious, but there are ways to engage with this information after you have it constructively. The pregnancy and lactation report is an 8-page document that was prepared specifically for the White House and given to Dr. Walensky, to the FDA, to the White House in April of 2021. Now, I am the daughter I'm the daughter and granddaughter of immigrants, but I'm the granddaughter of 2 people who lost 8 siblings in the Holocaust. And that's why I'm sitting here with you today, because if that wasn't part of our family's history, I wouldn't understand so clearly the importance of raising these warnings and calling attention to these atrocities. I've written about, and I know it's illegal in Germany, too bad, I'm going to use my American free speech I'm in a free place. I've studied deeply the history of Nazi medicine. As a result, when I saw the pregnancy and lactation report as a Jew and as the granddaughter of people, part of whose family were wiped out by them, this was a very chilling and recognizable document. It had charts, very, very scientific, neutral, careful chart. Even superficial students of history, you know why I stress that. These careful charts show horrific damage to women and babies in the pregnancy and lactation report. There is a chart showing menstrual damage to tens of thousands of women, 15,000 women bleeding every day after being injected, 10,000 women having 2 periods a month, 7,500 women having no periods at all, meaning they're totally infertile, 10-year-old girls bleeding upon being injected, 85-year-old women bleeding upon being injected, women hemorrhaging, women passing clots, lives ruined, and certainly fertility ruined. All of it documented meticulously by Pfizer in the pregnancy and lactation report, which went to the White House and to Dr. Rochelle Walensky and the FDA. I'm quite sure if you investigate, you will find comparable charts that went to your leaders across Europe because they were all on the same page. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Also in the pregnancy and lactation report is a chart showing that they experimented on babies and they knew it, and they experimented on at least 3 babies to death. Okay, this showed that babies who were nursing from vaccinated moms, these ones had vomiting, and these ones had edema, which is swollen tissues, and these ones had fever, and these ones had failure to thrive. They couldn't gain weight. These ones were inconsolable. I can never get that out of my head. One poor baby went into convulsions after nursing from a vaccinated mom, and then was rushed to the ER and died after multi-organ system failure. Her whole system shut down. What did they know? What is breast milk made of? I learned this in this process. It's made of out of the building blocks of lymph and blood. And so the lipid nanoparticles, the polyethylene glycol that are in the blood and lymph of vaccinated moms are turning into poisoned milk that is poisoning their babies. And Pfizer knew it. And to this day, the women of Europe don't know it. The women of America, for the most part, don't know it unless they happen to have heard me or come up on this book. And so they're so at risk. And nursing, which is such an important part of human development and bonding and the immune system, has gone from 34% of all babies and moms to 14% of all babies and moms. And babies' first experience, I think we're going to see the damage of this in a generation, of human intimacy is poisoned nourishment now. And they don't have the words to say it to their moms or dads. But Pfizer knew. So this went to the White House, and 3 days later, on April 23rd, 2021, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, a mother, I should note, gave a White House press conference to the people of my nation saying, with this in hand, there's no bad time to get your COVID mRNA injection before you get pregnant, during your pregnancy, or after your baby is born. She said that, knowing this. Lastly, in the pregnancy and lactation report, 2 babies died in utero, and Pfizer concluded that they died due to, quote, maternal exposure to the vaccine. So Pfizer knew that they were going to kill babies, that they were killing babies, and put them at risk. And fast forward, because I need to reach some of the conclusions of my talk. This is very predictable, what would happen. We're now 4 years after the rollout of this injection. And this book will show you this 360-degree attack on every aspect of human reproduction. Well, Igor Chudov, a mathematician and commentator, has analyzed government databases from about 20 different nations, including European nations. And vaccinated nations have lost 13 to 20% of their live births have dropped by that amount. And he calculates that in Europe, there are 1 million missing babies. We analyzed the government data from Canada, another terrible drop in live births. And now there was a big study from the Czech Republic, I believe, that also showed a dramatic drop in live births. And other studies are confirming what we began to publish in 2022, that vaccinated women are losing their eggs. They don't have the fertility of unvaccinated women. So this happened. This happened. And in spite of every effort, people who tried comprehensive suppression of this could have saved so many lives. I was just in Iceland. They are not at replacement levels for their own population. They now have 1.5 live births for every couple of 2 Icelanders. Icelanders will be extinct over time, God forbid, unless this can be reversed, unless we can study and treat the infertility that Pfizer and their allies brought about. So to conclude, because I know we need to take questions, why I have concluded very reluctantly that we can't attribute these horrors to, corporate greed, people moving too fast. If someone tries to tell you that, they're lying, right? If it was corporate greed, then month 1 or month 2 of seeing these deaths and side effects, Pfizer would have pulled, and your authorities would have pulled, Britain's authorities would have pulled, Canada's, Australia's, this technology. But they didn't. And by the way, lipid nanoparticles have been known to damage human fertility since 2017, and they chose to use them anyway. No, you can't conclude that this is an accident. You have to conclude, since year after year after year unfolded, knowing this damage, that Pfizer knew, your elected officials knew, your public health authorities knew. This is my speculation. I await an investigation. Our public health authorities knew, our elected officials knew, the FDA knew. There was collusion at the highest levels to make this happen. I'd love for it to be an accident or corporate greed, but it isn't. It is a mass murder. And again, I say this deeply knowingly as a Jew, as the granddaughter of Rosa and Joseph Wolf and all of their lost brothers and sisters. This is the greatest crime against humanity in recorded history, just numerically, because billions of people have been injected with this. So I will end by telling you why I believe it's a bioweapon, and that it was deployed, in effect, to reduce Western populations and influence. Number one piece of evidence is research I did that found that in 2021, there's an SEC filing, the Securities and Exchange Commission in my country, which is BioNTech, which is the subsidiary of Pfizer that produced this mRNA injection. And it is a memorandum of understanding, meaning an agreement, a legal agreement, that shows a partnership between BioNTech, which we're told is a German company, but it's not a German company, it's a German-Chinese company, because the partnership is with the Chinese Communist Party. The partnership is with Fosun Pharmaceuticals, which is one of the biggest pharma companies in China. And you all know, in any major company in China, it's the partners. Fosun create 1 billion doses of this injection for internal consumption. They use a different injection in China. They manufactured 1 billion doses to Western Europe and North America. And in the SEC filing, it specifies that the IP, intellectual property of the injection, is to be transferred. It doesn't say to a Chinese individual. It doesn't say to a Chinese company. It says to China. So since 2021, if you're taking an intervention that was formulated, manufactured, packaged, distributed by people who have stated that they want to be the world's hegemon by 2049, 100 years after the independence or the establishment of Chinese communist rule, and who have made war on the West in many other ways. And I don't think they're working alone. I think, there's alliances at levels that we can discuss, but just from my knowledge that our enemies are making this injection. Also, the deployment, again, isn't random. There are 11 manufacturing plants in Western Europe, 14 now in North America. But the side effects are not random. And again, to me as a journalist, rather than as a doctor, this is very important evidence. Of the almost 43,000 serious adverse events in the Pfizer papers, they're not randomly distributed around the world. They're localized in Western democracies. And not only that, but this really caught my attention as a political consultant. The greatest number of serious adverse events are in the countries with the most influence in Western democracies. So over 42,000 in the United States, and then after tranches of serious adverse events in European countries in descent of political importance and population importance. So Germany, France, Britain, Italy, Spain, Greece, in that order. And then all the rest of the world, the other 52 countries of the world combined, amount to about 7,000 adverse events. And what I want to tell you is that it's very easy to target the value or the damage of these injections by manipulating things as simple as serious damaging particles as Pfizer, but Pfizer has more DNA contamination, as it's been discovered, or by manipulating things as simple as temperature. You remember that it was supposed to be, this material is supposed to be kept very, very cold, and then you stopped hearing about that. The materials coalesce at room temperature and at warmer temperatures. So I can't pursue that, right? This is beyond what's in the Pfizer papers as a journalist. In spite of being called a conspiracy theorist worldwide, I do what I've always done, which is I stick to the facts. I don't go beyond what the evidence provides. But that evidence to me requires investigation. How do you take something that easily is manipulated to target populations, and you have these terrible losses and damage and infertility in Western nations? So I'll stop there. We can talk about what I think it means that other plot being mandated. But I will note, if I have a minute to conclude, that if you look with this analysis at who got mandated, certainly in my country, but I believe throughout Western Europe, but in my country, who got mandated? It was our soldiers, our sailors, our Air Force, our special operators, right? Our special ops fighters, next generation, our college students, if they wanted to go back to school, the kids of the elites, interestingly, Ivy Leagues mandated. Who else got mandated? Our healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, right? Our first responders. The people who were mandated were the people that you need to keep a society functioning if it's under attack. And I do owe a great deal to my husband, who spent many years in the intelligence community, in military intelligence, by explaining to me that there are many ways to make war on a nation, and that not all of them involve bombs and land invasions, and some of them involve subverting or tenderizing the enemy through non-traditional means. So that's why I bring up the contamination of our But I would understand if there are similar laws in Europe that whether or not these texts are on a personal phone, they belong to the people, and you have a right to subpoena them, you have a right to see them. So what's preventing Europeans from seeing what's in those texts?
Let me answer that. That would be our despicable Ursula von der Leyen, who is corrupt to the very core of her being. She simply refuses to give out those texts. She has been admonished by so many authorities, whether it was the ombudswoman or whoever it was, Parliament. Now there's even a court ruling telling her that she was in violation of the EU treaties by refusing to share those texts. And unfortunately, the texts probably don't even exist anymore.
Well,
So, and that's
let
that.
me
The thing is,
jump in there.
yeah,
As a tech CEO, I will just note that all texts still exist somewhere and are recoverable, even if she deleted them. I do hope we get through security going home. And I would also say that these are really cosmetic gestures and slaps on the wrist, censure. And now you know that a big crime may have been committed. So I would have thought that what I've shared with you could allow you to pursue criminal investigations. And I assume the rules of evidence give her fewer options in a criminal matter. But those may be evidence of a very major crime.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Obviously, echoing my colleagues in welcoming you here and for your interesting contribution and all the work you've done. And to add to what Christine was saying, I was pregnant twice during the time that vaccines were pushed on us. And the audacity they had to tell us that if you contracted COVID, you ran the risk to have a stillbirth or a miscarriage. But if you had the vaccine, you would be safe, is unbelievable, knowing what you know now. And I mean, I'm ashamed to say that I had 2 shots, and hindsight is 2020. Unfortunately, I wish I knew then what I know now, or maybe listen to Christine more carefully back then would have been helpful. But the sad part is we would only know in about 10 to 15 years time what will happen to our children or what we have done to them while we were pregnant. And then the audacity for them, knowing what it did to fertility, knowing what it did to babies, to have the vaccine, to then say, no, it's not the vaccine that would cause it, but actually contracting COVID, that to me is astonishing. That being said, I was wondering whether you know of any studies that are being conducted now to determine what the side effects of COVID have been thus far, because what you have elaborated on here today, it was what Pfizer already knew, but there must be so many more tales. I mean, the things that you mentioned in articles that I've read, things that I recognize in myself, eyesight problems, acute joint pain that came out of nowhere and then just disappeared again. I mean, there must be countless stories that are being attributed to something else, but that is actually vaccine damage. And are you involved in any of those studies or research? Is there anything on a big scale being done to see what damage has actually been caused to our populations, apart from the birth rates, which is very easily measurable in Europe and the West?
So sorry. First, I was just saying, thank God you've got 2 children. And the next thing is, when I said there's hope, even though this is such a dark subject, now that you have the information, this is exactly what humans do to save other humans. If they have some influence authority, they launch the studies, they find the interventions, they find the treatments, and so on. So I never ever thought in my life I would say thank God for President Trump and RFK Jr., but here I am. Because we have RFK Jr. running HHS, we are likely to start getting what he calls gold standard science. And I still think there's huge pressure on him not to look at damage from the COVID injections, but he has been like one of our biggest drugstore chains has stopped giving the COVID injection because they don't have a recommendation from RFK Jr. CDC. So those are things that are good that are happening. In terms of other studies, it's difficult because pharma funds so many universities and so many studies and scientists. But if you look in the NIH database, you will see that there are peer-reviewed studies. Our team actually published a peer-reviewed study showing some of the side effects from these injections. And so it's more and more fully documented. I definitely want to echo what you're saying. I personally know anecdotally so many people who are suffering what I know to be mRNA injection injuries, and they have no idea, and their doctors don't tell them. And I'm sure that's happening in Europe. And we have to change that so that doctors can have some idea of what they're looking at and can treat people accordingly. And the last thing I want to say, it's very vestigial. We are not funded to do studies. That's not something we have the capability to do. I'm sure you guys can influence funding. Certainly, funders at HHS are influencing funding for studies now. But I do want to say two of the huge takeaways are inflammation and circulation. So anecdotally, what I tell my loved ones is that everything you can do to detoxify, to support your lymphatic system, and to support your circulatory system, and also to engage in an anti-inflammatory lifestyle is going to help your body deal with, I'm not going to say process and eradicate, but deal with the damage from this injection. And I know that's very primitive compared to the sophistication of this harm, but I think, with more studies, real medicine can build on real treatment, real science can see what real cohorts look like. I do want to say something to this question, though. You said, how can we ever trust them again? In the United States, trust in public health has completely collapsed. And I know anecdotally, vaccinated people, unvaccinated people across the political spectrum who are doing everything possible to never see a doctor or go to a hospital again, an allopathic doctor. The good news is there's a booming, integrative medicine, taking the best of allopathic medicine and other treatments that we know are not so harmful in America. And I'm sure that that's happening in Europe and all over the world. But this is a crisis, right? We need to be able to trust our doctors and our hospitals, but they have to earn our trust.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much,
Hi.
Dr.
Frederick first, and then you, Brian.
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wolf, for your speech.
Thank
Is
you.
it me first or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, just you.
In France, we have a Minister of Health, Mr. Rousseau. He went on national radio and he said these vaccines were safe and effective and there were no side effects. Go and get injected. As a journalist, I actually filed a lawsuit against him. I was actually thrown out of court because I did not have any right to act. At the end of the day, this is part of trust. You just mentioned trust. If we can't trust the politicians for what they say, if we can't trust the judicial system, what in your views are the recourse we have as journalists in order to ensure that truth is being said, or at least what scientific truth we have, and what remedy can we get?
Sorry, you're asking as journalists or citizens?
I would say I'm a citizen journalist.
Right. Well, I'm
And a
not
politician
gonna,
as well.
I'm not going to sugarcoat my response. Journalism in Europe and Britain is in a catastrophic state, right? And it's difficult to get access to the truth. It's difficult to produce the truth. You get censored in many areas when you produce the truth. It's difficult to make a living producing the truth, and it's very difficult to combine uncovering the truth with justice. I just was in Britain a year ago testifying on behalf of a journalist named Mark Stein, who lost his show on GB News because he had me on to report these findings. And Ofcom, which is a quasi-government agency media watchdog, shut down his show. And they didn't say you were wrong or she made a mistake. What they said was, this is upsetting to people. So you can tell the truth in Britain. We told the truth, he told the truth, and you can still have your career closed down, tens of thousands of pounds in damages, in costs, legal costs, completely silenced throughout Britain because the truth is upsetting. So this is why I'm so moved to be here. Europe invented free speech. Britain invented and developed freedom of speech and laws to protect free speech. And so I'm not here talking just about an injection that went bad. I'm talking about the essence of liberty itself in Europe, of which this is just one symbol. So that's why I would say the answer to a lot of what I've spelled out here in Europe has to do with having your own sovereign nations again, in your own borders, in your own citizens, making your own laws at a parliamentary level for the people, and not having their sovereignty drained by supranational entities that the people didn't elect and can't influence. That is the answer, and it worked for us, right? I try to be nonpartisan, but the people of the United States spoke, and there was enough scrutiny of our voting system, which is also very important, that someone the globalists didn't want to have, but who was a populist nationalist listening to the people to some extent, got into office. RFK Jr., who would never have been imagined a year ago to have been, in charge of science in America, is in office. And I'm not saying that's the end of the story. There's always a fight for freedom and everyone's imperfect, but that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had our nation state defended and at a state level, right? And that's why I'm so worried about the draining of sovereignty from France and Italy and Germany, because the only way we could police our rule of law was at the level of Alabama and Missouri and, Texas and other states that said no and protected the vote and so on. So you need your borders back. You can't have a citizenry that can legislate without having borders. And you can't have a citizenry that can legislate if the people are not citizens. So that's what I would say about the importance of your organization and sovereign nations in Europe.
Hallelujah and amen to that. Seriously. Okay, Brian.
Hi, yes, the gentleman earlier had the question about China, and I was wondering if you would mind if I just address that, because full disclosure, I'm married to Naomi, and I remember you had me research that part somewhere between walking the dog and Meatloaf, I believe.
Super fast.
Super fast. So Sinovac was and it's a great question. Sinovac was the company that made Coronavac, which was issued to the Chinese people, as well as Turkey, Indonesia, Brazil, pretty much some of their top partners in the Belt and Road. Well, it's an inactive coronavirus. It's different than mRNA. What's telling about that is Fosun Pharmaceuticals is an offshoot of Fosun International, one of the biggest Chinese companies out there, who actually makes, I believe, most of our vaccine. And they refused it 3 times when Biden offered them a vaccine that their company made. And I think that, for me, is the most telling thing.
Thank you so much for adding that.
There any more questions? Oh, yes, back here. And may I make a suggestion? I don't know, what time do we have to leave the room? Okay. Oh, yeah, then we have some at the latest. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you for giving all this insightful information and personal risks you've had to take to do all this.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask you if you could give us further information maybe on how the vaccine links to dementia, because a lot of older people, maybe even those in our families, for example, my grandmother, have suffered from dementia ever since taking the COVID vaccine.
I'm so sorry. And thank you for bringing that up. I know one of the most disturbing things, everyone can hear me, right?
Yeah.
One of the most disturbing things sort of emotionally for many people is personality changes that can arise in loved ones. And there's enough anecdotal evidence. I mean, this is one of those things that requires a lot of study, but it tends to fall into categories of very binary thinking. People are no longer capable of nuanced thinking or shades of gray kind of critical thinking, and also impulse control problems. People get very enraged, road rage, accidents, fights, a lack of regulation, emotional regulation, and dementias, as you mentioned. So now we know the mechanism for that, or at least some of the mechanisms. There's always more to find out, right? But we know, as I mentioned, that the lipid nanoparticles traverse the blood-brain barrier. And indeed, lipid nanoparticles were developed and understood to traverse the blood-brain barrier. They were initially used 10 years ago to bring medicine to people with brain tumors because those people were so far gone and had so little chance of living that the risks of the lipid nanoparticles in their system was defensible because they were going to die of a brain tumor. But it was known that this material goes into your brain. Now, what it does, and a book by Dr. Michael Nels called The Indoctrinated Brain is a really important book. He's a German neuroscientist. He points out that the combination of propaganda, repetition of messages while people are in a state of fear actually damages and rewires the brain. And also that there's this actual brain damage from the injection, specifically destroying or damaging the prefrontal cortex, which is where impulse moderation takes place, where we don't say, terrible things to our loved ones, even if we're thinking them, and also where memory. One of the most disturbing things he found is that people with a combination of this rewiring through propaganda and the actual brain damage lost their memories of themselves, right? And it was replaced by the propaganda, so that when you challenge the propaganda, you've seen people storm out of the room when you say, well, let me show you this data that contradicts what NPR is saying. That's because you're not just challenging their knowledge base, which people used to be able to handle in a debate, but you're challenging their sense of self itself because their brain has been rewired, essentially. So I think that's really worth noting. I don't know what happened, obviously, in your grandma's case, but there's so much dementia and Alzheimer's type damage in the Pfizer documents that it's just understandable. These lipid nanoparticles damage the brain as they circulate through the system, crossing the blood-brain barrier. And that's why, again, study is so important, because what you've got, among other things, is an inflamed brain. You've got brain inflammation from the lipid nanoparticles. And so if you can engage in anti-inflammatory treatments, that could help heal some of this. There can be, trauma-based interventions that can help with the way propaganda rewires the brain. In effect, you can possibly rebuild the myelin sheath of the nervous system, which helps all impulses travel through the nervous system. But those are things that it takes political will as well as institutional will in universities and labs and so on to deliver. So that's the best I can do. And I'm really sorry that that happened to your grandma.
It's funny that you should mention Michael Nels, because believe it or not, my colleague Gerhard Hauser from the group The Patriots and we hosted him
Wow.
just before the summer break. So yeah. Okay, are there any more? Yes, please.
Yes, maybe one more question. Thank you so much for what you have said about Europe, because that's exactly what we are fighting for, Europe of sovereign nations, which implicitly means a Europe of liberty and freedom. And thank you so much also for your tremendously important work. My question refers to some of the last words of your talk. You said never again, it should happen never again. So what is your judgment on the political attempts to change this policy forever and to never let happen it again? Like in the US, you are a bit luckier than we are at the moment in Europe, where especially with your Minister of Health, I think you mentioned him before, Robert Kennedy Jr. We all know, wants to get rid of all these criminal policies, but as we see, the forces of darkness are striking back. And just today, I read that there is a pressure campaign to move him out of office, to remove him. So, what is your prediction on this? Is this possible for the dark forces to gain this power again, to remove such an important figure like Robert Kennedy? When all these things have come to light already, is that possible? Is that thinkable? Or do you think there is a revolution going on which will not be reversible again? And and it's a matter of time that this will end forever. Yeah.
Thank you. So what I would say is it depends on the American people if the forces of darkness prevail, just like it depends on the people of Europe if the forces of darkness prevail here. And what I mean is, and this definitely comes from my life as a White House spouse back in the Clinton era, and also as a political consultant to the Clinton team and to the vice president at that time, Al Gore. Even though it was some decades ago, the pressures remain the same for any administration. You can have the best administration in the world, and the pharmaceutical lobby is so powerful in the United States. They fund the left and the right. They fund senators and congresspeople in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party. I mean, Bernie Sanders, who is a Marxist, gets so much money from the pharmaceutical lobby. So it is going to always be a fight. And just getting people elected doesn't solve the problem, right? The campaign is day by day, as you all know. But what I would say is that President Trump and Vice President Kennedy have taken on very, very, very dangerous and powerful forces, and all politics is compromise. So, Kennedy hasn't withdrawn the COVID vaccine from the market. That's what I want. That's what I push for. That hasn't happened yet. But what he's doing is very smart politics of, getting rid of many corrupt people within the CDC, working where he can. But what I would say about our system is Kennedy and President Trump and whoever comes after President Trump are only as powerful as their constituents are active. And if their constituents are not active and holding their feet to the fire, organizing, voting in midterms, voting in elections, bringing voters to the polls, putting signs on their lawns and so on, you're just going to have the same group of lobbyists that surround you here. They're the same people who surround people in Washington, take over the agenda. And so it really depends on the people. That's why I'm so preoccupied with getting laws into everyone's phone so they can see what's happening and lobby. Now, you all have a very serious problem here, which is it's very difficult for people in Europe to lobby, right? Lobbyists can lobby, but the people, it's very difficult to find out what laws are even being debated in European parliaments, let alone in this parliament. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to intervene. It's hard to share those laws. It's hard to search for them deliberately. They're made opaque deliberately. I've looked at a lot of databases. Yours are so bad, and as a result, the forces of darkness there's no leverage point, right? Unless it comes from an awakening of the people here, as I said before, organizing and getting their borders and their parliaments back. So that's just my answer to, I'll never forget what Vice President Gore said to voters. He said, if you want a good bill passed, I can't do it for you. You've got to make me, organize, force my hand, put pressure on me. And I never forgot that, because the people who are sitting at the table in Washington as in Brussels are the special interests. You know, they're the ones who are drafting the bills. They're the ones who are putting the clauses in the bills. They're the ones who are putting their friends' interests in the clauses in the bills. I'm guessing that's true in Brussels as it's true in Washington. And the only antidote for that is for the people to be empowered through knowing the laws, sharing the laws, being able to call your chief of, well, a real chief of staff and have a real meeting with a real parliamentarian, and returning the power of the parliament to the people of sovereign nations. So I'm sorry to repeat myself, but that I've looked so closely at this since 2007 when I wrote a book about how democracies die and tyrannies establish themselves, and that is literally the only solution. So the people of Europe have to peacefully rise up and take their rights and laws back.
By the way, the poor transparency of the websites, that you can't find any legislation that is going to be passed or whatever, and you know, just the impossibility to find anything in particular on the websites. By the way, it's not a bug; it's a feature.
Totally a feature, not necessary.
Okay, are there any more questions? Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case. So then all that's left for me is to thank you for really bringing it to a point what we are facing. And I mean, I've been saying that for years now, is yes, our democracies are under attack, and I never tired to specifically speak about the Western democracies. You just added one more point to that list. I wasn't even aware of the fact that the mRNA injections were deployed pretty much in a specific kind of fashion, so they would cause specific side effects in these countries and others in that country. But it just pretty much is just another piece of the puzzle that we're putting together. I've been talking about that this whole COVID madness, it was a test balloon. They needed to get the Western democracies ready to, pretty much abolish freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, to undermine our constitutions, to turn privileges, fundamental rights into privileges that, the government can grant or withhold depending on how you behave. So we're seeing erosions of constitutional rights. We are seeing infringements, not only infringements, pretty much the abolishment of free speech. And as you mentioned, had there been free speech, they would have never been able to cause that much damage via the lockdowns and the mRNA injections. And to sum it all up, once we had the COVID committee in this house, the title of it was Lessons Learned from COVID. And in the beginning, I was like, oh, wow, they really want to look into where they went wrong and what mistakes they made. No, that's not exactly what they were trying to achieve with that. What they were trying to figure out is, where did we fail to get the people to simply do what they were told? And believe me, they found out during that COVID committee. In the final report, they repeated every single lie, every single one, despite all the evidence, despite everything that was known up until that point. They ignored it completely. The people that were, trying to shed light on things, we were openly mocked, we were laughed at, we were ridiculed, and they actually continue to do that to this day. So now we're sitting in the committee, Stunt Committee, and whenever we bring up the adverse events of the mRNA injections, they openly laugh at us. And so they're determined to destroy our freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And I can only tell the people, you need to wisen up, and you need to take charge of your democracy, because it's your democracy, by the way. They all call it our democracy, but that's not the democracy that you actually would want. So take charge of your democracies, get involved, and don't let them run all over you, and don't let them lie to you anymore. Take charge, because truth be told, you are their bosses. It's not the other way around. And some of them, or most of them, they keep forgetting that. But that's pretty much everything for me. Once again, thank you so much for coming here. It was very enlightening. It's very interesting. We have some information now. So I'm looking forward to the next Stunt Committee. They're going to have fun. And thank you so much for coming out. And I do have a little present for you. So we figured flowers would probably not be appropriate going back on a plane, but we got you some Belgian chocolates.
That's so wonderful.
And,
How did you know I wanted that?
Enjoy.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy. And thank you
so much. Thank you all so much. What an honor to have been with you. Thank you. What a beautiful gift. Thank you so much. Shall I just get off the stage now?